Hello, class. Um, Today we're going to talk about the final lesson, Lesson 10, um, and it is entitled appropriately, We Make the World, and it focuses on the work of medical anthropologist Paul Farmer in Haiti, in Africa, and the work of a global health network that he helped create. Um, no further ado, let's move on. Um, So this chapter carries out the theme of looking at how ordinary people like Dr. Jim Kim, Ophelia Dahl, and Dr. Paul Farmer, how these ordinary people can actually become um, heroes. And this is carrying the thread from the last lesson, lesson 9 of heroes. There's another example here of how one's personal story can make a big difference. The first story we will look at today that your text provides the template for is really about a friendship, though. These three friends were not much older than many of you. They're early college students, out of college, early 20s. These three friends were not much older than, like I said, like many of you. And through their work, they became extraordinary. Um, and so that's what we want to look at is their work. Paul Farmer in 1983, um, he um, he went to Haiti and met Ophelia Dahl. Um, and so he was 23 years old, and um, he was in college at the time. He had not done um, his anthropology work, in other words. Um, he had done a report, though, on Haitian immigration workers that were working on farms outside of Duke University. So he wanted to get a closer look at Haiti, which is what brought him there in 1983. Um, in Haiti, he was traveling on precarious roads like this one here, and he was with Ophelia Dahl, his friend, and they came across a bus accident. And Ophelia said, I mean, this was really a horrific accident that was caused by these roads, the crickety bus. Ophelia said it was, just an accident that um, Paul was distraught and upset heavily, and but Paul was seeing the accident through his anthropological framework that he had been introduced to um, in college, and he was seeing the big picture of it. He sees this woman who was laying on the side of the road dead, who was just going to the market to sell mangoes, and her need to go to the market to survive, and the fact that she was in this crickety bus on this crickety road, and this wreck was actually an artifact of a colonial history that had sent Haiti to poverty. And so when he sees this woman dead, he says to Ophelia, "It is never just an accident." So what he was doing was he was seeing, we're returning back to our lesson 8 here, he was seeing it through the eyes of this history. This road and this wreck was just an artifact of this colonial history that we've talked about. Um, and so what we're talking about here is a history that started with slavery in 1625, enslaving a very rich and resourceful um, uh, culture and society. Um, Out of coveting and greed, the French um, imposed slavery, and of course the Haiti slave revolt, the first slave revolt that was successful, that created the first black-led republic in 1804. However, um, Haiti was not accepted by the world and did not recognize them as independent republic, and so they were alienated from the world in the world of global trade. And the French sent world warships that demanded $21 billion, which sent Haiti plummeted them into debt for 100 years. Um, and then the U.S. occupied Haiti. Um, and of course, since then, it has been just a disaster. It has been a collapse, economic and environmental collapse for them. Um, and now we have this dire situation that you hear about every so often. Any type of environmental, when there's a hurricane or a earthquake, the region just gets more and more plummeted into this poverty. So this is the history that Paul Farmer was seeing, and it is a structural history. It's never just an accident, he says. So going back to our themes for the class, seeing big, seeing the big picture, which is the historical and cultural structures and conditions, seeing small, seeing the roads, seeing the bus, seeing having to go to the market to sell your mangoes, the small aspects of life that is connected to the bigger cultural, structural conditions of the larger perspective. And that is what we do when we see it all, see the small connected to the big. Um, that is really what was propelling Paul Farmer and Ophelia. He and Ophelia became a team. He ended up going to Harvard and studying medical anthropology. There are only a couple of programs in the country that you can do this. It's a growing number of programs, but Harvard is one of them, Case Western. Um, but this is a great multidisciplinary pathway that combines the world of biological anthropology and cultural anthropology. You might have recognized Ophelia's last name, Dahl. Ophelia is the daughter of writer Roald Dahl, who wrote Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, James and the Giant Peach, The Witches, and other books, children's books. So yes, Ophelia Dahl definitely has a name for herself and what she does, and her work in Haiti. Um, and so at Harvard, they meet. Paul meets Jim Kim, um, who is also a medical anthropologist student, and they start to build a relationship in their common interest in Haiti, and start to go to Haiti while at Harvard, even trying to balance going to Haiti while working on their PhD, which is just insane to think about. But they were, like I said, they're extraordinary in their efforts. So one of the moments that changed the course of Paul Farmer's work and his team there was when a woman came into a health clinic in which they were working. This woman came in with malaria, was pregnant, and needs a blood transfusion because the blood is killing her and the baby. She's going to die, and they're scrambling around trying to find blood, but there is none at the hospital. So they need to send somebody to the capital to get the blood, and which is only going to be $15, right? So Paul's a poor student. He doesn't have $15 on him himself. And so he goes around the hospital trying to collect the money for this $15. He comes up with $15, but now he needs to send somebody to go get the blood. So he sends the sister of the woman, who has to take a bus. She has to actually have to pay for a bus, of course, to get to the capital to get the blood. She doesn't have enough. She has $15. She has enough to buy the blood, but not to have the bus. So she doesn't make it back with blood, and her sister dies. It's a horrific situation. And the whole time that this was happening, the sister who lost her sister, who's the mother of 5 children, is screaming, "Toot, moon, say moon. Toot, moon, say moon. Toot, moon, say moon," which means everybody is somebody, or in other words, we are all human beings. We all deserve dignity. This saying would become the heart of Paul Farmer and everything that they do from that moment on. He was so frustrated with this that he went around and collected thousands of dollars to create a blood bank at the clinic. But this was still not good enough because the blood bank at the clinic was actually charging people for money for charging money for the blood, and of course, people don't have money to pay for the blood. So Paul Farmer creates his own hospital. And this is part of a this is I think the preview for a documentary that you can find online, of course, and that is documents Paul Farmer's work and, of course, Jim Kim's work as well. I'll play a little bit of it in segments throughout this.
Et pas gon l'hôpital défecté, j'aime dire qui j'en des maladies qui me défait. Et bien, celle ça a été fait pour moi, il était uniquement préparer tout testament. Je l'ai mis d'abord ici de l'hôpital Cange. Docteur Polo te dit non, je ne peux pas mourir.
I went to Haiti in 1983. I hadn't even started medical school. I met the people who would become my best friends and co-workers.
I had never seen such abject misery in my life.
We started going house to house, and the people were so sick.
So we'll be coming back to this, of course. People were so sick, and they were borrowing medicine from Harvard, bringing it back to Haiti. And they were, quote unquote, borrowing, but they were actually stealing it at the time. They eventually paid it back, but they were desperate and resorted to, in a sense, Robin Hood type tactics to get the medicine that they needed. So they were doing everything they could as grad students, trying to make ends meet, but they were struggling. They couldn't do this on their own. And it was, it was all about money and resources. Paul writes this article in the United States that entitled "The Anthropologist Within," and this guy by the name of Tom White, who was had a successful career in Boston, owning construction business. And Tom White saw the article, and Tom White was retiring. And he sends out the word that he wants to meet Paul. Paul tells him that if he wants to meet him, then he needs to come to Haiti. But then he did not realize that at the moment that actually Tom White wants to give away his wealth. So initially he didn't consider it seriously, but then when he realized he wanted to give away his wealth, and he definitely opened up the door to meet with, Tom White. So this created an alliance. Tom White and Paul Farmer became a team. And to give you a little bit of backstory about, the extraordinariness of Paul, at Harvard, there was a clinic for the poorest of the poor. And Paul was serving there as a student. Not only was he going to Haiti, but he was serving at a homeless clinic and at Harvard. And he went to visit an AIDS patient one night, and the AIDS patient did not come in. Paul is wondering why the AIDS patient did not come in, and finds out that the patient is scrambling to come up with the money to pay for rent. Paul signed over his own paycheck to help this patient and himself to help this patient. And of course, sign over your paycheck. Therefore, Paul Farmer didn't have any money, and he himself went hungry that night. And so that this guy who was an AIDS patient didn't get evicted. Paul sees Tom. Tom says, I'm worried about you, son. Your own health is at risk if you're giving your own money away. And Tom says, you have to take, care of yourself. Paul points out that the story of the AIDS patient, and that, God, he says, quote unquote, God is taking care of me by sending me you, Tom. And in a sense, in the world of Hinduism, one might say karma works in this world. So with that money, Tom ends up giving $1 million to help support Paul and his team's work in Haiti. And 1987, Tom establishes what is referred to as Partners in Health. And the idea is not to support Paul in Haiti, but to support Haitians in Haiti to get where they can support themselves through their own health care. The idea of Partners in Health is to create community healthcare network and to, in a sense, create an army of Pauls. So the guiding quest for this team was this motto. For the longest time, it's been written into the rules that the poor do not get the best health care, even at the highest level of the World Health Organization. For example, if you're poor in Haiti with TB, you may get a certain level of care, but you're abandoned for dead if it goes beyond that level. Whereas in the US, all kinds of resources are going to be thrown at you regardless of who you are if you have TB. And so what they wanted to do is make sure that the poor could have that option as well. That meant that being willing to spend thousands of dollars on people who will never see $1,000 in their lifetime. A treatment for a tough case of TB can run up to $60,000. So Jim and Paul were saying that we're going to give that option to the poor. O for the P. We're not going to settle for the minimum. This may not sound cost effective. You know, how you could save many lives possibly for $60,000 that is being spent on one person, but they had a larger vision of bending the structure of the world medicine cost. And that is, of course, where the title of this documentary, Bending the Curve, gets its name.
And I thought, how can we get this fixed?
Jim and Paul were constantly going back and forth, and they would borrow things from some of the hospitals.
I would put that medicine in these big suitcases. They usually thought I was a tourist.
As soon as we opened the clinic doors, it was every possible disease you could imagine.
Elle a besoin d'urgence tout de suite. She's dying. I think it's too late. This was life or death. Getting medicines down there was life or death. And everything was conspiring against us.
So yes, they were fighting the structure, the establishment. That is, when you hear establishment, that is the structure, the medicine structure. So there was a structure of power for medicine, and high prices at the top there, $60,000. You're going to pay that when hundreds of thousands of people have TB? That's the question, of course. Because the prices are high, no one buys the medicine. World Health Organization will not recommend the medicines because of the high prices. Generic manufacturers will not produce it because there is no one to buy it. And that maintains the status of high prices. The worldview, as far as the supporting myth, that is that poor people are poor because they're lazy or not intelligent, stupid. People were saying that even if we give them these medicines, they're going to mishandle them, and people are going to build up resistances, leading to having these wild multi-resistant strains of different diseases. And we're going to be in big trouble because of that. We're going to be wasting our money. Paul knew this was not true. They were poor, but not lazy. That myth has been around, and is the culture of poverty even exists, of course, in the United States. You know, I shouldn't even say even. This is where it is established. It's in the Western world of other places, including our own. So this poor people are poor because they're stupid and lazy, and therefore they don't deserve it. And that is what is at the foundation of why we don't provide for people who are in poverty. So everybody is somebody, and this is what Paul kept on coming back to. Tout le monde c'est monde, tout le monde c'est monde. Kept on coming back to this. This was his mantra. So he did not just stay in the clinic in Haiti, but he approached the sickness in Haiti by going actually to, as an anthropologist would, going to the homes. And he realized in studying, doing basic ethnography work, studying the personal lives of the people who were becoming sick, it wasn't just that this person is sick, but it was that this person was sick and living in certain conditions. So he wanted to know what these conditions were by going house to house to house. And so he came up with from this insight, from doing this work, he came up with this insight, and that is that proper drugs are necessary, of course, but also what is necessary to make these drugs administered successfully is regular visits from healthcare workers at the homes. And not only that, but what was needed was cash stipends for food and childcare while they are sick. So you not only need money for the drugs and also to pay for the healthcare workers, but also you need money, stipends for food to help the sick. Because what happens when poor people start taking medicines, they start to feel good, even though they haven't necessarily overcome the immunity or the virality of their sickness that still can spread if they go back out into the community. And so when poor people start feeling, well, they're poor, they need to work, so they go back to work. They're not lazy. They're in a sense desperate, and so they go back to work even while they're still sick. So if they have a stipend of money, then they can stay home and get well and have the health care that they need. So he started to train healthcare workers to go out to the homes and make sure that they were taking the right drugs and staying healthy. So this was the foundation for what made this model successful. And before, the success rate was dire, it was dismal. After Paul Farmer came in, the success rate was nearly 100%. People around the world start to look at Haiti and say, hey, this model's working. How can we do it elsewhere? It started to, in a sense, reshape global health all over the world. So, including in Peru, where there was this multi-drug resistant strand of TB called MDR that was devastating the people. And of course, they were looking at the price of the drugs for treating this MDR. And Farmer's prescription for that was the proper drugs. $15,000 is the baseline for fighting MDR. It's an expensive baseline. Regular visits from healthcare workers, cash stipends for food and health, childcare while sick. And of course, the World Health Organization said, "Are you crazy? We can't sustain that. That is ridiculous." And of course, Paul kept on coming back to Tout Moun C'est Moun. And of course, the response was, yes, okay, everybody is human. And well-meaning people were saying, reasonable people, caring people were saying, you just can't sustain this. Sometimes the number given to the average person in the world, as far as living in these impoverished, underdeveloped communities, is about $2.67 per person to take care of them and their health care. So when we throw out the number $15,000, it's just, no way. However, for Paul, it kept back coming to this, yes, there is a way. Tout Moun C'est Moun. Tout Moun C'est Moun. So, back to our little documentary.
The scientific community hated it. He said, it's not sustainable, it's silly, this could never be replicated.
We could not administer the program because we don't have the doctors.
In that script, we are uneducated, of course, stupid.
If you've traveled to rural Africa, you know this. People do not know what watches and clocks are.
None of our patients have died. One person died a few days after starting therapy because we started too late.
It took us from being outsiders right into the middle of the debate.
So, so we see that there's this great success, but they don't have the money for it. And Big Pharma is holding the cost of drugs high, even though they could sell them cheaper. So, Jim Kim, he specifically takes on this task. And all Paul, Jim, and Ophelia, they have had anthropology in their background. They know that the price of drugs is a social construction. It is a structure that's been created by a system. Basic anthropology, the high price is created by all of us. There's a system to it, and maybe we can change it. In particular, Jim Kim became sort of the lead on this. Kim is this Korean American kid, growing up in a small town in Iowa, and takes to anthropology to understand his own Koreanness. And once he figured that out, he said, well, you know what, that was interesting, but what's more interesting is what else anthropology can do in the world, which is to possibly help save people. And so he asked the question, how can we make the difference? How can we make a difference? How can I make a difference? And the first thing he does in this task of taking on these high prices is to work with IDA. So IDA is this company who makes generics. Think of when you go into CVS or your local pharmacy, and you see the generic form of Tylenol or ibuprofen. You know, there's companies that make those and saves us all a lot of money. So he starts to work with IDA to get generics to make it. And but before he does that, he sets up what is referred to as a green light committee, so that anybody who wants to make use of these generics, they have to go through a committee, and that is a new structure that has been created so that there's a system to make sure that those people are actually will be taken care of, and so that everybody who wants the drugs has to go through the structural support of the committee to make sure that they are properly administered. So with these two elements involved, prices fell dramatically, 95 to 97% of the cost down, and therefore allowing for thousands and thousands of lives, hundreds of thousands of lives to be saved because the prices went down. So you still need money, of course, and at this time, Tom White is actually 2001. He's getting really pretty close to his end of his money. He's running out of money himself. And so therefore the foundation of the economics for partners and health is in trouble. And so meanwhile, at the same time, millions of people in Africa are suffering with AIDS, and only 50,000 people are being treated. So there's this huge, big global crisis, and they look to Haiti's model, what's happening in Haiti with TB, as a potential model for fighting AIDS around the world. And they also realize that in Haiti, the economics is not much different than what you find in Africa. And so this is when, shortly after 2001, is when Jeffrey Sachs and some, and I believe it's Haiti, the Gates Foundation, they pitch in, a big chunk of money to help save the work of partners. They create what's called the Global Fund. That was the first sort of influx of cash to save partners. And there was a big moment in which treatment was getting cheaper, largely because of people like this Dr. Agnes Megmagwahu in Rwanda, who was pioneering a model of Partners in Health there in Rwanda. And Paul himself goes to Rwanda to work with her and to set up the model. And that people at the higher levels could see that this was working, and then this happened. This was the moment that really sort of the game changer, I guess you could say.
Today on the continent of Africa, nearly 30 million people have the AIDS virus, including 3 million children under the age 15. There are whole countries in Africa where more than 1/3 of the adult population carries the infection. More than 4 million require immediate drug treatment. Yet across that continent, only 50,000 AIDS victims, only 50,000, are receiving the medicine they need. Because the AIDS diagnosis is considered a death sentence, many do not seek treatment. Almost all who do are turned away. A doctor in rural South Africa describes his frustration. He says, "We have no medicines. Many hospitals tell people, you've got AIDS. We can't help you. Go home and die." In an age of miraculous medicines, no person should have to hear those words. AIDS can be prevented. Antiretroviral drugs can extend life for many years. And the cost of those drugs has dropped from $12,000 a year to under $300 a year, which places a tremendous possibility within our grasp. Ladies and gentlemen, seldom has history offered a greater opportunity to do so much for so many. We have confronted and will continue to confront HIV/AIDS in our own country. And to meet a severe and urgent crisis abroad, tonight I propose the emergency plan for AIDS relief, a work of mercy beyond all current international efforts to help the people of Africa. This comprehensive plan will prevent 7 million new AIDS infections, treat at least 2 million people with life-extending drugs, and provide humane care for millions of people suffering from AIDS and for children orphaned by AIDS. I ask the Congress to commit $15 billion over the next 5 years, including nearly $10 billion in new money, to turn the tide against AIDS in the most afflicted nations of Africa and the Caribbean.
So, like I said, it was a game changer. And this was what was being referenced in President Bush's speech was the work of Paul Farmer and Jim Kim and the team.
It took us from being outsiders right into the middle of the debate.
The results were dramatic and transformative.
We decided this could be something like a movement.
You are accountable to who? People are dying, my brother.
Rwanda is the most dramatic arc to a recovery.
Threats of the deadly Ebola virus landing in the East African region.
All borders are informed and screen anyone coming in Rwanda.
Tout le monde c'est monde. Si moi-même cap vivre jodi am ta aimé.
To me, this is about hope, and it's about rejecting despair and cynicism.
So, highly recommend this documentary. It's awesome. If Paul Farmer is the model for the rest of the world, then, and for anthropology, we are golden. This is a sign in Partners in Health, their offices. But the fact of the matter is that Paul is exceptional, of course. We all cannot have the medical training and the ability to go to Harvard and gain these skills and these abilities. And actually, Partners in Health, they have this sign, but it is actually written on a card that is covering another word. And if you lift up that card, it actually says screwed, because we cannot rely upon everyone being Paul Farmer, right? However, we can all lead, and we can all definitely make a difference. We can all do something. And as another great anthropologist, Margaret Mead, says, as what Paul believes, she said, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. And that is exactly should be our mantra going forward. So 4 things you should have just burned into your memory and never to be forgotten as you leave this class and go out into the rest of your educational and life pursuits. We are the structure. It is what we make of it. We make the structure. Participation is not a choice. Your lack of participation, or your perspective of not participating, is a form of participation. How we participate is our most important choice that we have. And that is something that, is the essence to this class. So, in concluding, make a great day and make a great world. Thank you.